Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish-American businessman and philanthropist who lived from 1835 to 1919. He was one of the wealthiest people in the world during his lifetime, amassing a fortune in the steel industry that reaches a total of $310 billion in today's money. Even so, he is perhaps best known for his philanthropic work, which at first glance was motivated by his belief in the duty of the wealthy to use their wealth for the greater good. Carnegie's philanthropic efforts focused on education, libraries, and peace. He believed that education was the key to social mobility, and personally funded the construction of more than 2,500 public libraries throughout the English-speaking world. He also established the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which worked to improve teacher education and public schools in the United States. In addition to his work in education, Carnegie was a strong advocate for peace. He funded the construction of the Palace of Peace in The Hague, Netherlands, which served as the location for the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and also established the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a think tank that works to prevent and resolve conflicts around the world. Overall, Andrew Carnegie's philanthropic work had a lasting impact on education, peace, and public welfare around the world, and his legacy continues to inspire others to use their wealth for the betterment of society. So with all these in mind, it's unthinkable that such a kind and generous man may have anything selfish in mind. Although philanthropic acts can appear admirable on the surface, it may act as a facade to a much darker story. It all began in his very own steel company, the Carnegie Steel Company, which is one of the largest and most profitable in the world. However, his success came at a very hefty price. In exchange for the riches he acquired, the working conditions of his workers were notoriously brutal. The workers often got subjected to 12-hour workdays, 7 days a week. Safety measures were almost non-existent, and accidents were so frequent to the point that it was not uncommon for workers to see a colleague maimed or killed before their very eyes. Despite the massive profits Carnegie was making, workers were often paid very low wages of $150 for 12 hours of work. This was barely enough to support a family, and workers often had to take on additional jobs or work overtime just to make ends meet. Carnegie himself was known for his frugal approach to labor costs, and he believed that paying workers more would make them lazy and unproductive. He also opposed labor unions and strikes, which he believed would disrupt the efficiency of his operations. As a result, workers often had little bargaining power and were at the mercy of the company's management, which eventually gave rise to the Homestead Strike of 1892. The workers at the Homestead Steel Works, one of Carnegie's mills, went on strike after their wages were cut, and they were forced to work longer hours. Carnegie, who was vacationing in Scotland at the time, ordered his plant manager, Henry Clay Frick, to bring in a private army of Pinkerton detectives to crush the strike. The Pinkertons, armed with rifles and Gatling guns, engaged in a brutal battle with the striking workers, resulting in a total of 10 deaths, 7 of which were workers, and dozens more were injured on both sides. The Homestead Strike was a turning point in American labor history, and it exposed one of the many dark sides of Carnegie's patronage. In 1889, he wrote his very own essay entitled Gospel of Wealth, which professes that the rich had a moral obligation to use their wealth for the greater good. However, this was the complete opposite of Carnegie's actions, as he was willing to use violence to protect his profits and maintain his control over his workers. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, which Carnegie used to break the strike, had a notorious reputation for violently suppressing labor movements, and their use in the Homestead Strike only served to further tarnish Carnegie's image. While Carnegie eventually sold his steel mills and retired from business, it still did not wash away his sins and wrongdoings against his workers. Labor practices at his company had a lasting impact on American labor relations. The Homestead Strike and other labor disputes of the era highlighted the power imbalance between workers and their employers, and they paved the way for the labor movement that would emerge in the early 20th century. Despite being one of the most generous philanthropists of his time, giving away millions of dollars to support various causes, conducting a closer examination of his seemingly good intentions reveals that it was not without controversy. While his giving was often celebrated for its scale and impact, Carnegie's philanthropic agenda was not as altruistic as it appeared. Instead, it was driven by his own personal interests and preferences, which perpetuated existing power structures and inequalities. Carnegie's giving was focused primarily on elite institutions and individuals. He believed that the best way to promote social good was to support the institutions that already had the most influence and power. This included universities, museums, and other cultural institutions. Carnegie believed that by supporting these institutions, he could help to create a more enlightened and civilized society. However, his preference for supporting elite institutions meant that his giving often perpetuated existing power structures and inequalities. For example, his donations to universities like Harvard and Yale allowed these institutions to further entrench their position as the preeminent centers of power and influence. This perpetuated the existing social hierarchy, which was based on education and class. Furthermore, Carnegie's giving often came with strings attached. He was known to be highly critical of institutions that did not meet his standards, and he would withdraw his support if he was not satisfied with the way his money was being used. This put tremendous pressure on institutions to conform to his vision of how they should operate, which was often at odds with their own values and priorities. Carnegie's philanthropy was also used as a way to promote his own image and legacy. He believed that his giving would cement his place in history as a great philanthropist and industrialist. This led him to be highly selective in the causes he supported, preferring those that would bring him the most recognition and acclaim. As a result, his giving was often motivated more by his own ego than by a genuine desire to improve the lives of others. In addition to his ego, Andrew Carnegie firmly believed that the United States had a manifest destiny to spread its influence across the globe. He saw imperialist ambitions as a way to expand the market for American goods and create new opportunities for American investors. Carnegie used his vast wealth to promote American interests abroad, funding initiatives that he believed would advance American commercial and strategic goals. In 1898, when the United States declared war on Spain, Carnegie offered to fund the construction of a fleet of warships, arguing that the country needed a modern navy to compete with other major powers. He also supported the annexation of the Philippines, believing that the islands would provide a valuable foothold in Asia for American businesses. Carnegie argued that American control